Today is really our introductory lecture to the class, along with starting some of the material from chapter one. So, thinking about what is strategy, why is it important, why should you care, all those sorts of things. So, just a few reminders. Please review the syllabus carefully. The link is here. The link is on Blackboard. You'll be able to access it from the slides. Also, please do not forget that the course guide is truly your key to the semester. So, while the first page of the course guide just gives you the general overview, remember if you click those links on the left-hand side based on the week, it takes you directly to all the lecture links, all the things that you're accountable for in a particular week, the readings, the videos, all those sorts of things. So please use that course guide very carefully. Make sure you're scrolling down and getting to the other pages to get that information. Also, as I mentioned in your syllabus, and I just wanted to bring to your attention again here, Gemini gives a 1 year free access to students. I would highly recommend it. I think it's a very useful AI tool, and would encourage you to sign up for that so you get access to it free of charge. And then Notebook LM is another Google tool. The access is always free, but it truly is tremendous. And I've even got a short video to walk you through like how to utilize some of the key features. And they've even been updated since that video was recorded. So now you can do really cool infographics and presentations using the information you upload to Notebook LM as well, in addition to the podcast and the things that I show you. We'll cover briefly. I haven't introduced myself very much, and so I'm going to take a moment to introduce myself and a little bit about me, and then, as I mentioned, some of that chapter one material. So about me, I am in my 11th year at WKU, and it's hard to believe that it has gone by that fast, and that I can already be to this point. Prior to being at WKU, I was at the University of North Texas, and prior to that, I was at Murray State and Purdue. So all of my degrees are in agricultural economics, and that may sound like a really strange career path to end up in entrepreneurship from there. But in high school, I was very involved in FFA because I'm from Princeton, Kentucky. I grew up in a very rural community, 15 miles outside of Princeton. And so all I really knew was ag, and what people had told me I should do with my life. And so I studied agribusiness at Murray State, agribusiness economics. And one of my professors there said, you're pretty good at this. You should go get a master's. I recommend going to Purdue. And so I went to Purdue for my master's and PhD, and those degrees are also in agricultural economics. But as soon as I arrived at Purdue, my advisor asked me what was I interested in studying, and I gave a really lame answer of commodity and price analysis. And she's like, "Oh, that's not interesting at all. Like, what new is there to study there?" She's like, you have a small business background from your family. Why don't you, like, are you interested at all in like small and family business? That really changed the trajectory of my career and my life. So, although my degrees are in agricultural economics, I've been teaching, researching entirely in entrepreneurship, small and family business since 2010. After a brief stint at Murray State in 2010, I moved to University of North Texas and I joined their management department, and really the rest is history. I've been in entrepreneurship ever since. In terms of, I ask you on Pack Back what you hope to learn in this course, and I want to share with you what I hope to learn as well. So I think what we do in this course, as I mentioned in the welcome video, is incredibly important. And I hope to really integrate the news into the things we're learning as well. And every time I teach this course, the news cycle is different. So I really hope to like catch back up to speed on all the current events. Sometimes I sit out from the news for a minute if it's too stressful. And then how to tie that into the business news and then into the things that we're learning in class as well. In terms of something I'm good at, I'll really push you in this class since it's a capstone level class to think about what your strengths and weaknesses are. So my personal strengths are that I'm a really innovative thinker, and that leads me to be a creative problem solver. So I can really think critically about problems and look at things from different angles or lenses than others might. And something I struggle with is hard conversations, particularly when the other person might interpret it as criticism. In terms of my hobbies, I do strength training 3 times a week, and then I watch my kids do their thing. So my little boys are on this slide. Charles is the one in the green jacket, and Booker is the one in brown. Charles is 10, and Booker is 8, and they are my best buds and sidekicks. So I spend a lot of time with them and enjoy every second of that. All right, so that's about me. Now we're going to get into chapter one and like why this class is important. So, what is strategy? Why is it relevant? And what should we be thinking about just as an overview? And the book does a good job at talking through this stuff. So, the book is going to give you finer grain detail, and I'm just going to hit some of the highlights. So, you can expect that in these supplemental lectures. I'm going to hit the high points, but it's also up to you to go back to the textbook and take a look at it and read it more carefully so that you get the more of like the detail, the finer grained information that it has there. And some of the examples too, which will be different from my own. So why do we care about strategy? Well, I mean, I think that's a word we hear a lot in business, without really thinking about what it means. And it's critical to a firm's success, and it's really difficult because the landscape and the environment are constantly changing. I mean, if you think about it, it's very rare that businesses don't go through cycles where they're more successful, less successful. When I was a kid, for example, like Sears and J.C. Penney were major retailers, and they are no longer major retailers. I mean, when we think about major retail, we think about online retail like Amazon, or we think about Walmart or Target. We do not think about Kmart anymore, because retail is a struggling environment. And so we have to think about what strategies keep firms relevant. Like, how has Walmart been able to weather the Amazon storm? And how have they been able to continue to post profits and succeed under inflationary situations, under intense competition and competitive dynamics, the onslaught of technology, and how that's caused them to have to shift their strategy and that sort of thing. So it's really important to business. If a business wants to last, if they want to sustain over time, then they have to think about strategy and whether their behaviors and tactics align with that broader strategy to ensure that they're performing at a level that will allow them to sustain their business. And this is salient whether you are a small business owner struggling to pay your employees and fight inflation and that sort of thing, or whether you're a major Fortune 500 business. It doesn't matter. Strategy is going to be important. Bigger businesses have more resources to dedicate to strategy. They have, a CEO who really their job is to be like the chief strategy officer to set the vision and to think about the bigger picture, things for the business. Whereas, a small business owner, they have to think about strategy, but sometimes, they may not have as much time to work on the business because they're spending all their time fighting fires in the business. And so it's important. The thing about strategy is that it matters whether you have 5 employees or whether you have 5,000 employees. And we're really going to be covering sort of the gamut of that in this course. In terms of what is strategy, so when we talk about strategy, we're going to be talking about some very specific things. We're going to talk about core competencies, which are the major things within a firm that you leverage in order to get a competitive advantage, which means you beat out your competitors or you get a leg up and you earn above average returns. If we go way, 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 way back to your introductory micro classes, so if we're thinking about econ, right? We know that every rational decision maker in a business has the objective to what? Maximize profit. And so this holds, right? We know that companies are out there, especially those where there are stockholders. They exist to provide above average returns, so that they can sustain themselves over time. And the way that they do this is through strategically managing the firm. So when we think about the strategic management process, what that is it's everything that the firm is committed to, the decisions it makes, the actions it takes in order to pursue a strategy that leads them to competitive advantage over the long term and above average returns over the long term. So that's what companies are looking at. They're looking to develop their skills, abilities, experiences to create these core competencies like innovation, customer service, those sorts of things that lead to a competitive advantage that yield above average returns. So if we think about this, like let's look at the example of Chick-fil-A. Their core competency is truly customer service, right? Oh, thank you. My pleasure. We can all, like, if you've eaten there, you know that that's part of the dynamic. Because people feel like they get superior customer service there, and in the fast food realm, then they have a competitive advantage over other fast food restaurants. And that has led them to above average returns over time and an extremely competitive franchise process and that sort of thing. So the strategic management process is where you think about all the things you commit to, the decisions, your behaviors that align strategy with hopefully yielding above average returns over time. And this entire class is built on that premise of seeing the connections to help you pull together a winning strategy, right? You have to understand what's going on outside the firm, inside the firm, with your stakeholders, changing taste and preferences, looking at what your competitors are doing. All of those are important to pull together a winning strategy so that you can be like, you can earn a competitive advantage and higher performance over time. And we'll talk a lot about what strategy is as we proceed in the course, but I just want to make sure that you have a very basic understanding. So I'm a visual person, so I like to have a visual of how strategy works. So what you'll see on the left-hand side is we have analysis, strategy, and performance. So when we set a strategy, we really have to start with the analysis portion. So what does the external environment look like? So those are things like, what's the legal regulatory environment like? Or how is technology impacting a particular industry? Or how do shifting consumer taste and preferences impact an industry? And then we have to look at the internal environment. So what are our resources? What are our capabilities? What are our strengths and weaknesses? And both of those things together are going to influence the vision, mission, and values of the firm. Um, all of that information taken together is going to lead to both the formulation of strategy and the implementation of that strategy. And then, hopefully, in terms of performance, if you've chosen the right strategy, if you are taking the right moves, then that's going to lead to strategic competitiveness or an advantage and above average return. So you have to analyze, formulate your strategy, implement it, and then measure performance. And these are the factors through which a firm is going to do that. And we'll cover all of this more in depth as the semester moves along. But I do think it's important because this visual is really going to inform the approaches to strategy and like how strategy is built in the subsequent slides. So strategy is going to look at both your internal and external factors, and I do want to get a few of these on your radar. So you can think about globalization, so how the global economy is connected. So if there's like a poor wheat crop in South America, how does that influence the rest of the world? Or if something happens in Australia, how does that affect a US market? In terms, we have to think about the competition in the industry. Obviously, technology, AI use, those sorts of things are really important. Regulation, politics, the ways consumers behave, the economy, and how it's performing. I was just reading an article today about the K-shaped economy, which means that wealthier business entities and people are spending more money. So, like business and professional class airline tickets are selling more, and they're actually crowding out they're overpowering the profitability from like the more like coach or like consumer class, like if we were to travel for a vacation in my family. And so it's really important because that impacts how Delta, United, those companies, those airlines are going to be promoting their strategy for the upcoming year. And then you have to think about skills and capabilities, which are internal, right? The things that I'm good at impact the skills like that I have or that I garner. And then that allows me to create capabilities. I leverage all of that into core competencies, competitive advantage, and so on. So there are three major views in how we look at strategy. There are the IO model, okay? There's the resource-based view, and there's the stakeholder model. So under the IO model, it makes the assumption that the process is sort of linear, that you start by looking at the external environment, you find an attractive industry, you formulate your strategy, you develop the skills or assets that you need to perform in that industry, you implement your strategy, and then you earn superior returns. So it says we look externally first. So for example, if you were an entrepreneur, according to the IO model, you would actually look at all the factors going on in the world, and then you would choose an industry and formulate your strategy, get the skills you need to succeed, implement that strategy, and earn superior returns. That's what the IO model tells us. Now, from an entrepreneurship perspective, I would argue that perhaps that's not the way that a small business owner would operate. But if you're GE looking for a new business unit, this may absolutely be the way that you operate. Or if you're Amazon, if you think about it, they looked at the external analysis, they saw that like web services were becoming a big deal. Then they formulated their strategy to develop Amazon Web Services, developed their skills or assets and team, implemented the strategy, and now AWS is a huge part of Amazon, the largest arguably. So, you know, this particular model might work really well under like a big company that already exists that's thinking of expanding, or somebody with lots of resources. It probably is less of the way that like an entrepreneur or startup would operate. In terms of the resource-based view or RBV model, it says that you really start by looking at your own strengths and weaknesses as an individual or as a startup team, and then you develop capabilities, competitive advantage. Then you find the attractive industry to operate in, implement your strategy, and earn superior returns. This model is used a lot in entrepreneurship to explain why entrepreneurs launch their businesses or how they do so. And that they really start internally looking at what they're good at, what capabilities they've developed that can lead to a competitive advantage, what industry that would apply to, based on their experiences, and then work to implement strategy and earn returns. And then the third and final model is called the stakeholder model. And this says that that business owners are going to look at their stakeholders. So employees, customers, the people who live in the community, all those surround them, all those who interact with the business in some way, shape, or form. And you don't have to be a customer or employee to be a stakeholder. Although those people are stakeholders. Then it looks at reciprocity. So like, what do we owe other people, or what do we think other people like? If we do good, will they do good back to us? And then you take all that information to formulate a strategic plan, formulate it, implement it, and earn superior returns. So this says essentially that being a good corporate citizen and taking your stakeholders into account make a difference. So for example, if you think about like businesses that are B Corp, like B Corps, like Patagonia, for example, right? Really looking at like the global environment, expecting that people will spend more money on your product if it's sustainable. Then you create your, knowing all this information, you create your plan strategy formulation and you implement it, right? And so this model can be particularly salient to like businesses that are concerned with sustainability, environmental impacts, societal impacts, those sorts of things. So that brings us back to this diagram. So the IO model is going to start with the external environment, right? It's going to say that's where we start. The RBV model says we're going to start with that internal environment. And really, the stakeholder model says, okay, well, we've probably taken stakeholders into account on vision, mission, and values. And that's where we're going to kind of start, is thinking about what do we want to be about? How do we take all that other information to formulate strategy? So I think this is really helpful, especially after you've seen those three models, to understand how does the analysis portion work to formulate strategy. And we'll be working on all of these, as I mentioned, as we move forward and learning more about them. But I think it's important to understand the perspective and where each one of these is coming from in terms of helping formulate strategy for a business, and where it's like what contextually makes that more valuable. So for example, like we might start more internally as a small business owner, more externally as a Fortune 500 company, and then the stakeholder model can really be applicable to any. And so it's really important to understand that these are different lenses. They're not necessarily opposing models, but they have higher or better applicability to different contexts or situations. What this does is we've talked about and seen like, okay, how do we move from analysis to strategy to performance? We're really going to look at that mission, vision, and values segment on the next week. This says on Wednesday. That's because I was teaching this last semester. But we're going to look at mission, vision, and values in week 2. And I would hope that you always have your laptop. So please excuse the announcements, but we will get into mission, vision, and values next week. And then go from there. So hopefully you found this helpful. If you have any questions all about the material, I would encourage you to post them on the discussion board on Blackboard, and always know that I'm here to help. Go ahead and start introducing yourself on Packback. Make sure that you're registered to get launched in the class, and then go through all those Start Here materials, and just make sure you're caught up to speed before we really dive in full force next week.